Welcome to Appreciating the Entrepreneurial Journey, the podcast for business owners who want to see around corners and thrive financially. Your host is Cannon Carr, CEO and business owner at CornerCap. Tune in every week for lessons learned from the trenches of entrepreneurship, business success, and financial independence.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. Today, we are focused on developing an advisory board. And this is actually an excerpt of a conversation we had in recording last week's session with Joel Koblentz, where we focused on succession planning in that session. But we actually had a kind of a sidebar conversation on how to develop a board of advisors for entrepreneurs as they build their companies. And we figured we would feature it today in this segment, separate from last week's segment. So it's a great conversation and excited to bring it to you. As a quick reminder, Joel Koblentz is founder and CEO of the Koblentz Group. They specialize in board development, recruiting senior leadership, and providing strategic advisory services for public and private companies, many of whom are multi-generationally owned, family-run businesses. Succession planning and board development is right in the wheelhouse for Joel. And in this particular conversation, we'll spend a few minutes in an interesting example of how and why he encouraged a family business to put a board of advisors in place formally. He'll walk through kind of how they did that. But then we kind of go a little bit further and come up with a little bit with a framework for how to think about building an advisory board. You know, when and whether you should do one and when, why, you know, how to construct it and who to put on it. So it's a real useful conversation. Takes about 10 to 15 minutes just to keep in your hip pocket. Sit back and enjoy the conversation on board development with Joel Koblentz. And I said, let's talk about board development later, but let's just spend maybe 2 minutes on it or 3 or whatever it is. But because you've having that outside counsel, that third party you can bounce an idea off of who will challenge you. That could be a board of directors. That could be a trusted source, and even as simple as an accountability coach. In your experience, how should a first generation owner put that structure in place? What are those alternatives, and how do you put that in place?
Well, and I'll tell you why to do it first.
Yeah.
People use boards for different reasons. They use advisors for different reasons. Now, I'm gonna do this by an example of one we just finished. It's for a company in California. And they're in commercial construction. They are in a business that's changing pretty rapidly. They're also in a business that, if you wanted to grow, you certainly could pursue a roll-up strategy. A lot of their competitors are local to their local markets.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, how do we grow? Do we grow by continuing doing what we do in our local market? Do we grow because we do have the capital to do it? Do we grow by looking at adjacent businesses, maybe in our local market, maybe not? Or do we really pursue a roll-up strategy, knowing what we know about technology in our sector and maybe applying that and having access to a broader customer base more locally wherever we might acquire? So when we got into this, there were a number of open questions. But one of the questions I asked them is, what have you pursued so far?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we looked at a business in the Southeast. We really liked it, but we just didn't know how to integrate it. We felt we just weren't going to get the value because of our own actions, not because of them. So that made them look inwardly at themselves. Okay, what do we have to do when we see a business like this? Second of all, they looked at a business that was an adjacent business, and it was in Texas. Very interesting. We were interested in it. The price was right. We just didn't know how to make that happen so that we got accretive value from the transaction over time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's opened the box of, well, okay, how do we close in and focus in, get the aperture right so that you have the kind of people around you who can help you make those determinations, okay, to cut the risk of a poor decision, to make the best of a good decision. We decided on a board, okay? We decided that we would structure the board with 3 outsiders, 2 insiders who were the principal owners of the business, and with guests from inside the company or outside at every board meeting, depending upon what was on the agenda. And the 3 board members, we brought them. One was the head of investment banking at a pretty sizable mid-market investment bank who leads their industrial products and manufacturing. So he's seen a lot of deals. The second was somebody who brings technology experience, because melding these businesses together is going to require ERP melding and technology. And that person has developed drone systems that are used in construction and other things. The third person, when you get into this, obviously is the arc of human capital. So how do you integrate people? How do you hire people? How do you develop them? How do you promote them? How do you compensate them? How do you evaluate them? And at times, how do you set up a departure for them? And that's something they didn't have, even though they're pretty sizable themselves. They had a human resource head. The person had been there 3 years. And the CEO told me, I knew from day 2, if not by week 2, that this person shouldn't be with us. But, they shared our values and so forth. So we got to a point where integration, if we made an acquisition, we couldn't count on that person. That person didn't have the kind of experience, know-how to help guide us to make this a successful transition. Because when you buy a business, you're buying their people. Products are pretty much the same. There's some differences in technology, but it's really about the relationships they have with their customers and how they build customer loyalty with customer service. So you don't want to lose people, and you want to build on it, and you want to learn from them. That was something they couldn't get through their HR person previously. So when we heard that, we were also thinking about a 4th seat called operations, and I talked them out of it, because I said at this point, yes, you need it, but you don't want to make the board too big that the advice you're getting is split among so many people that it would be hard for you to take action on. And you want people you can talk to offline. You want to call people between, say, look, I'm thinking about this. Is this something you know something about? Do you have an opinion about it? Where can I get it? Where can I get some advice on this, and so forth? And when they first started, they said, well, we ought to put our accountant and our lawyer on the board. I said, no, they're not independent. And they haven't helped you to this point. So, if you want the lawyer to help with a transaction, that's one thing. If you want the accountant, to write it up and do some projections with your financial officer and look at those, that's fine.
They're always available, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
That isn't transformational.
Yeah.
It's tactical. Okay.
Yeah.
We wanted to help them and they wanted to figure out how we could transform this business to be much bigger, faster, and successfully.
Yeah, awesome. So what a dynamic board. So, and then you'd also mentioned some guests, right, that were, I guess, there, not necessarily every time, but by topic or by agenda item.
Well, they were considering changing their ERP program, which is, the overall computer programs for the company and everything. Yeah. We suggested somebody who we had a relationship with who was out in the Bay Area who had just done that for his own company. So we made him a guest at one part of one of the board meetings so that they could hear some of the things and ask some of the questions that they needed to ask. Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. What, just out of curiosity, is that a paid board, or those paid board positions?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. When do you pay a board and when do you not pay a board?
Well, board compensation, and these are for private companies, can range pretty broadly. Can range pretty broadly. For that client, it's $50,000 a year plus some other perks. Some have been as high as $150,000 a year in some perks.
Well, and I've heard examples where there's no pay, right? Or they might have equity interest or something. I guess there's no formula, right? But it is, for smaller companies, they probably can't afford that level. So is it okay to have an unpaid board?
Well, you can if you're advisors, but you want people who have your best interest in mind, which means you may want to pay them on a per meeting basis as opposed to an annual basis. And
well, you get what you pay for too, I believe, right? So, I mean, you want somebody to take it seriously, and if it's free, they may not commit.
You want people who are well connected in or around those challenges that you will have to face or likely will face.
Mm-hmm.
So they themselves can be helpful to you. Okay. There's very few people that are just truly just want to give away their time. Yeah, if you want to join SCORE or something like that and be a senior executive, just trying to help people out, that's one thing. But
Mm-hmm.
you get into serious business, you want people who have the same interest and are aligned with you and really want to help you through this. And they'll do it for two reasons. One, they're interested in your business and they like you. That's point one. They think you're on to something and they want to be on the path with you. So they get some satisfaction. They'll also do it because the other advisors on the board are interesting people. So think in terms of Olympic rings. The people on the board probably intersect with each other maybe 10%, but it's the other 90% outside of the intersection
Mm-hmm.
that's really important. And so they build relationships that extend beyond that, which are valuable to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wonderful. So, well, last question here on this topic, and you and I could go all day on this. It's just fascinating. What is the right size, or how do we think about size on a board, right? For a smaller firm, let's say a small firm versus a middle markets firm. How do you think about size? Because you'd mentioned, right, you don't want the board too big. What is a good size?
Well, I think you should have an odd number.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they in a small company they probably don't have. They're more advisors than they are governors.
Mm-hmm.
But you still want, generally, there's enough topics and enough challenges that 3 is about where I would start with. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think you go more than 3 and you end up with, the theory of small groups, that every person who comes into the group changes the dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
You start with 3 and you see how that goes for a year or so. You give everybody the option at the end of the year, including yourself, to say this isn't working or we're going in a different direction. Or they may say, I don't feel I'm contributing enough and I don't have the time. So it's a 1-year commitment. And at that point, you can re-examine and look at whether you're really getting the value out of the board and the reason why. Sometimes it's due to the ownership. They don't really use them the way they should, the way they said they would. On the other hand, it could be advisors go off in different directions. They have different things that they're working on. We had one recently that was on a couple of advisory boards and one corporate board. He got offered a CEO job and he took it. And part of that role was that he could remain on one board, no more than one. So he took the paid board, the public company board, and he had to give up the 2 advisory boards. So people's situations change, but I think you start with 3. And depending upon the size of business, the complexity and the challenges you have, maybe you could take it up from that in subsequent years. You're more likely to keep it about the same size, and you're more likely to just change out the directors based upon the challenges that you're facing or would like to face or address, whether they're opportunities or not. And the number 3 sticks in my mind as one that is probably a good starting point, and
awesome.
maybe a point you can live with for a long time.
Yeah, and keeping it odd number certainly. Maybe you do to 5. Welcome back, Ken and Carr here with you. It's such a great excerpt of a conversation that Joel and I had on board development, and it occurs naturally for companies that are growing and trying to get to that next phase. When is the right time to strengthen your board of advisors or strengthen your informal advisors and make it more formal through a board arrangement? It's something that we at CornerCap here think through, and it's many of our clients think through, and many of the people we deal with. Having those advisors along the way is so important, building that ecosystem. We've talked a lot about that. But in particular, when is the right time to formalize a structure to really give consistent, targeted advice? And I thought I would just share 3 quick impressions from today. The first one is Joel's point about the purpose of adding a board of advisors, and that is to reduce the risk of a bad decision. And it's such a great, simple way to put it. When we talked about succession planning, he asked the question, as a leader, do you find yourself saying, I've taken this company as far as I can or as far as I should, on my skills alone? And if you are answering that question with yes, it's time to start thinking about grooming the right next generation leader. And building a board is kind of, I think, a similar thing. It's just a little bit more situational and strategic. But if you are saying yes, our organization's capabilities have gone as far as they should take us, and we are dealing with specific situational strategic issues, it's probably worth at least thinking through a formal board arrangement. The second point is, in building that board, you want to add those capabilities and build those capabilities around the gaps in your organizational skills or around those challenging strategic situations that you are addressing at any particular time. And it was interesting. Joel's underlying point here is, these assignments need to be transformational, or at least think of them that way, not tactical. If they're tactical, you might add your accountant or your lawyer to the board, but you're getting their advice anyway. His point here is, having an independent person who has a seasoned perspective on something specific that you are dealing with is the right way to think about it. And the third point, just about size. Obviously public companies have large boards. Large family businesses can have boards of with many individuals on it. But for smaller firms that are growing and hitting those next stages of growth, the boards don't have to be big. And it sounds like, Joel's magic number is 3 for a variety of reasons, which we talked about in the podcast. But as I think about it, I would call it the nimble 3, where you want to be able to change 1 or 2 people out at any particular time. So, and that's good and natural. So maybe make it a 1-year commitment, certainly paid if you can afford it, and have those people well placed to address those skill gaps and the strategic advisory positions you need so that you can avoid those mistakes. And, being able to have that board be nimble and responsive and evolve over time, probably a great way to think about it. So found this conversation fascinating, wanted to create a separate podcast for it. So that's what we did today. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you on the next one.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Do you want to learn more about exit strategies for business owners? Visit cornercappodcast.com for a free copy of our ebook with everything you need to know to make a smooth transition out of your business. Tune back in next week for another episode.